Hi everyone, this is Mary, you're in Mary Reads. Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is very much overdue and I'm very excited to be posting it today. So this video is about Agatha Christie. We'll talk about her life, her career, her legacy, and in the end there will be a small surprise and interesting fact about Agatha Christie. So stay tuned and let's begin. Let's start with a small overview. Agatha Christie is one of the most published authors in the world. Some sources say she's number 2 after William Shakespeare, but others claim that she's actually number 1. Whatever it is, in her life, she published 66 detective novels, 14 collections of short stories, and 6 novels. Publishing houses sold over 1 billion books of hers in English and then another billion in translation. So in total, more than 2 billion works of hers were bought and read by people all over the world. Agatha Mary Clarissa Miller was born on September 15th, 1890. She was the last child in the family. Her sister Madge was 11 years older than her and her brother Monty was 10 years older. She was born in the family of a wealthy American and an Irish woman, Clara, who was actually distantly related to Agatha's father, but not by blood. Agatha was a very wanted and loved child, and she completed the family of Millers. Agatha's upbringing was very unusual as she was homeschooled by her father. Her mom, who was a great storyteller, which played a big part in Agatha Christie's creativity, didn't want Agatha to learn how to read until she was 8. But Agatha was bored and she taught herself how to read by the age of 5. Reading all of these books definitely also added to her creativity, so mostly it was her mom and her storytelling abilities and the books that she read. Agatha Christie read all different types of books. She read Little Women, she read poetry, she read a bunch of different American thrillers, and she also tried writing her own poems. Her brother and sister were much older than her and they were away in school, so Agatha was alone. She definitely needed something to do. So she was writing poetry, she was creating imaginary friends, she was creating different scenarios and different stories. And when her sister was home from school, they would together create scary, frightening characters. And Agatha even had a recurring nightmare of a gunman. When Agatha was 11, her father suddenly passed away, and it was a huge hit for her mother. So they became each other's greatest companions. Again, her brother and sister were older, they did not live in the family home anymore, so Agatha and her mom were on her own. And eventually they moved to France, where Agatha attended different boarding schools and also took piano lessons as well as singing lessons. And she could actually be a famous pianist if it wasn't for her shyness. At the age of 18, Agatha started writing stories. She didn't do it because she wanted it to become her career. She did it just to be amused. She was in bed with influenza and she couldn't do anything, so her mom suggested her writing some stories just to make herself feel better. And this is how this whole story began. Some of these stories that she wrote during that time were actually compiled into the collections that we can read today, which is super exciting. There were short stories that she wrote later in her career, but some of her first stories were also saved, and we can actually see how she started and how she grew as a writer. Because of her mom's health and the family's need to economize, in 1910, they moved to Cairo for a 3-month debutante season. This is when young girls were looking for eligible bachelors and bachelors were looking for their future wives. Agatha really enjoyed dressing up, going to the events, even more than some of the archaeological digs that happened in Cairo at that time. We'll talk about digs a little bit more later because it was a huge part of Agatha Christie's life. But after the end of the debutante season, Clara and Agatha moved back to England, where Agatha started getting a lot of proposals. She rejected all of them except one. she agreed to marry her friend Reginald Lucy, who was very happy to get a yes from Agatha. But he said that if in the next 2 years, the duration of the engagement, if in the next 2 years she finds somebody who is richer, she's free to break off the engagement. And this is what happened. In 1912, Agatha went to a party where she met a very charming young man, Archie Christie. He was an aviator who applied to join Royal Flying Corps. Their affair started very quickly. Agatha broke off the engagement, but she and Archie could not get married because none of them had any money. They finally decided to get married in 1914, and on Christmas Eve, they became husband and wife. They spent a couple of days together, and on December 27th, Archie had to go to France, where he served during World War I. And Agatha stayed in England, where she volunteered as a nurse. They would see each other infrequently over the next couple of years until in 1918, finally, Archie was placed at a war office in London and they could be together. Agatha Christie said that this was the time when she finally felt like her married life began. Around that time, Agatha decided to write her first detective story. It was a bet with her sister, who told her that she will not be able to write a good mystery novel. Her inspiration for a detective were all of those Belgian refugees that came to England during World War I. She thought that it would be nice to have a Belgian policeman be a detective in her story. And this is how her first novel, The Mysterious Affair at Styles, was born, as well as her most famous detective, Hercule Poirot. As the murder method, she chose poison because for some time during the war, she worked at a dispensary and she was taught by a skilled pharmacist, so she knew a lot about poisons and how they worked. When the book was published and people were finally able to read it, they were amazed by how well she wrote the scene of murder and how well she explained the application of poison. Interesting fact, she actually got a review in a pharmaceutical journal, which is not common for writers at all. But fame didn't come to her easily. In the end of writing her first novel, she took a 2-week vacation to just take long walks, figure out how to end the story, figure out what needs to be changed. She talked with phrases her characters said in a book just to make sure that they sound well and that they work right. And after she did that and finalized her novel, she finally started sending it to publishing houses, who one after the other rejected her work. Everything changed in 1919 though. This was the year when Archie got a permanent job in London and they had just enough money to rent and furnish an apartment there. The same year, Agatha gave birth to their only daughter, Rosalind, and when a publishing house, the Bodley Head, took on her novel and, what's more, contracted Agatha Christie for 5 more books. They did ask her to change some scenes in the book, including the final scene. So instead of the courtroom ending that Agatha Christie offered, we now have the final scene in the library. At the same time, Agatha Christie started experimenting with genres and characters, and this is when Tommy and Tuppence, husband and wife detective couple, were born. She has 5 or 6 books with those characters. They're not my favorite ones personally, but they're definitely different from Miss Marple and Hercule Poirot, and they are worth reading. In 1922, Christie and Archie left their daughter with Agatha's mom and sister and went on a mission. They were promoting the Empire exhibition of 1924. So they went through the territories of what then was British Empire and promoted this grand event that was supposed to show the global reach of Britain and also help get the political ties with the British territories. The tour was a lot of fun. In one of the countries they visited for the tour, which again back then was a part of British Empire, Agatha and her husband learned how to surf, and Agatha Christie actually became the first woman to surf standing, the first British woman to surf standing up. When the trip was over, the family reunited with their daughter and they settled in a house outside London where Agatha started working on her second novel, The Murder on the Links. Around the same time when she was writing her second novel, she decided to change publishers because she thought that the terms that her publishing house, the Bodley Head, were offering were unfair. And she sought out an agent who connected her with William Collins and Sons, which we now know as HarperCollins Publishing House. 1926 comes, and this year brings a lot of sadness to Agatha Christie and to her family. Her mother passes away, and Agatha is the one who has to go to the house to go through the clothes and all the personal items and figure out what to do with them. Obviously, it was hard for her. She could not write, and being separated from her husband and being fully drowned in grief made her and her husband's relationship fade away. Archie fell in love with a family friend, Nancy Neal. And this is when a mystery in Agatha Christie's life happens. One night in early December, Christie left her daughter and her house to the maids and took the car. Nobody knew where she went. She didn't tell anybody. And the next morning, her car was found abandoned a couple of miles away from the house. Obviously, people did not know where she went, and there were a lot of rumors by magazines and journalists and just by general public. Nobody could find where she was. But she was spotted in one of the hotels where she checked in as Theresa Neal, supposedly using the name of her husband's lover. And she was recognized by the band, who called the police and who came to rescue her. And when Archie came to the hotel to get Agatha and bring her home, she did not recognize him, and what's more, she did not recognize her. Doctors thought that she was suffering amnesia. Maybe she had a car crash, maybe something else happened, and she never discussed it with her friends or family ever in her life, so nobody knows what actually happened there. Some people say that she did it as an act of revenge to make her husband angry, but others think that something actually happened to her. And here, what do you think? Leave in the comments your opinion. Do you think Agatha did it as an act of revenge, or do you think that she had a car crash and suffered some medical condition which led to amnesia? This event did not bring Archie and Agatha back together, and they stayed apart. Agatha lived with her daughter and the family friend in a house outside London, and Archie lived separately. Agatha could not write. She was going through a psychiatric treatment, and she still suffered from grief after her mother's passing. So obviously writing new material was not an option for her. And this is when her brother-in-law suggested her combining short stories that she wrote for the magazine about Poirot and making one novel out of them. And this was how the Big Four came to life. In 1927, Miss Marple was created. Agatha Christie liked this character, as nobody would ever suspect this old lady who was knitting and gardening, and she was actually a brilliant detective. Miss Marple's first appearance was in a short story for a magazine, not in a full-size novel. In 1928, Agatha Christie finally gets a divorce, and she, with her daughter Rosalind, moved to Canary Islands. This is the time when the writing became a profession for Agatha Christie, not just a hobby. She had to finish a novel that she was writing when her mother passed away, and it was a very hard thing to finish for her. She struggled to write the final scene of this novel, and this is when she realized that it's actually serious. It has to become a profession, and she has to do it no matter what. To make it a little bit easier for her, she decides to create a pseudonym, Mary Westmacott, and her first novel under this pseudonym comes out. The novel's name is Giant's Bread, and it talks about a composer who decided to reinvent his identity. And in general, she used Mary Westmacott as this outlet. It was easier for her to write more heartfelt, more honest stories when she knew that people are not going to find out who the author really was. And this is when archaeological digs return into Christie's life. In 1930, she is invited to in southern Iraq, and her friends introduce her to Max Mallowan, a 25-year-old archaeologist on training. They hit it off very quickly, no matter the age difference. They felt very relaxed and comfortable in each other's company, and their affair started. The affair was developing very fast. Max proposed to Agatha Christie the same year after he met with her family at their family home. And on September 11th of 1930, they got married and went on their honeymoon. It was a very eventful honeymoon. They stopped in Venice, they stopped in Yugoslavia, they stopped in Greece, and they really enjoyed being together. But Max needed to return to a dig, and Christie returned to London to write. This is when her first full Miss Marple novel came out, The Murder at the Vicarage. Then Agatha Christie decided that she can actually help her husband on the digs. So in the mornings, she wrote her novels, and during the afternoons and evenings, she photographed, drew, and cataloged the findings that they had during the dig. She even took a photography course to get better at it. So their yearly routine started. They were spending summers with Rosalind. In the autumn and spring, they were on the digs in Iraq and Syria. Christmas they spent with her sister's family, and the rest of the time they spent in London. And those digs played a huge role in Agatha Christie's writing career. She loved Middle East, she loved Egypt, and she started thinking about how to introduce those motives, that atmosphere, into her novels. So as you have probably already guessed, Death on the Nile, Murder on the Orient Express, and a bunch of other novels came out because of that love towards Middle East. Mary Westmacott continues existing though, and in 1933 her second novel comes out. It's called Unfinished Portrait, and it talked about a lot of Agatha Christie's experiences, and it was very close to becoming a biography of the author. Christie also started writing plays, and this happened because she saw a very unsatisfying play based on the murder of Roger Ackroyd. She was very upset with how it was done, and she decided that she should start writing her own plays. And then World War II begins. In 1940, the house of Agatha Christie's and Max Mallowan's neighbors was bombed, and that made the family leave and rent an apartment in Hempstead. And soon after that, Max was transferred to Cairo, where he was a commander of the squadron. Agatha Christie had to stay and volunteer in a hospital, even though she really wanted to be with her husband, and multiple times she asked to be transferred there and work in Cairo next to him. Agatha stayed very productive during the war. She missed her husband a lot, and she couldn't travel as easily anymore. So she turned to writing. And this is when the novels like Evil Under the Sun and Then There Were None were published. And Then There Were None was actually supposed to portray this grim and very enclosed atmosphere that people felt during the war, which I think it did a great job in showing. Around the same time, Agatha Christie penned her last novels about Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple. Curtain, the last Hercule Poirot novel, was eventually published in 1975 when she was still alive, but Sleeping Murder about Miss Marple was published after Agatha Christie passed away in 1976. But for the meantime, they were locked away and were not supposed to be published until her death. In 1940, Agatha Christie's daughter Rosalind got married and gave birth to a son. And Agatha became a very devoted grandmother. She spent a lot of time with her grandson, and even though her husband moved to Libya, he was transferred to Libya, she spent a lot of time with her grandson. Yes, she would sometimes go to see her husband and she would travel back and forth, but she spent a lot of time with the boy. Even though Christie couldn't travel for pleasure, she stayed interested in Middle East and ancient Egypt, and with the help of her friend, the Egyptologist, she wrote a novel about an Egyptian priest. And the novel was called Death Comes as the End. I haven't read this one yet, but I've seen it in the library and it is on my list. And archaeological digs would not let go of Christie. In 1946, after the war ended, she published her first non-fiction book, which was called Come Tell Me How You Live. This book talked about the time on Agatha Christie's expedition digs, gave details about how they went, what they found, what they did, and this marked her first work as a non-fiction writer. In 1947, Agatha Christie was approached by BBC, and they asked her to write a radio play for the birthday of Queen Mary, who loved Agatha Christie's work. And this is how The Mousetrap was born. It was the longest running play in Britain, and I think it's the longest running play in the whole world. Agatha Christie was getting older. She continued writing through her later years. Her fame grew even more. Her novels were adapted into plays and movies. Different publishing houses published thousands of copies. 2 publishing houses in total published 150,000 of her books, which is a crazy number, especially for that time. And Agatha Christie continued writing. In 1971, she wrote the last Miss Marple novel, except, of course, the Sleeping Murder that she wrote during the time of war and that was supposed to be published after her death. And her last Tommy and Tuppence book came out in 1974, and the characters grew old with Agatha Christie. So in the last book, they are featured as an older couple. Christie's last public appearance was in 1974 when she came to a premiere of a new Murder on the Orient Express movie where Albert Finney played Poirot. Christie liked the adaptation, but she did mention that Poirot's mustache was not luxurious enough. In 1975, The Curtain, her last Hercule Poirot novel, was released, even though she was still alive, and the New York Times ran their first obituary to a fictional character. Agatha Christie died on January 12th of 1976, and the lights were dimmed in West End theaters. And in the end, as I promised, I wanted to give you a small addition to the whole video. It is the 10 books by Agatha Christie that Agatha Christie herself loved. She made this list as a response to her Japanese fans who made a list of their favorite novels by Agatha Christie. And she said that the novels that she liked by her kept changing. She was rereading some of the novels sometimes to answer a question for her new novel that she had, and some of the novels she liked for other reasons. But at the time when she wrote that list of 10 books, these were her favorites. Number 1, And Then There Were None. This novel Agatha Christie liked a lot because of its difficult technique that she thought she worked with pretty well. Number 2, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, which was the general favorite. Number 3, Murder on the Orient Express. It was a new idea for the plot and Agatha Christie really enjoyed writing it. Number 4, A Murder is Announced. Agatha Christie said that all the characters were very interesting and she enjoyed writing them. The 13 Problems. Agatha Christie called it a good collection of short stories. Towards Zero. Agatha Christie said that it was an interesting idea to write different people and lead them towards murder rather than starting from a murder. Endless Night was Agatha Christie's favorite novel at the time when she made that list. Crooked House. Agatha Christie said that it was interesting to explore one family in that depth, and that's what she did for that novel. Ordeal by Innocence. This is the novel that Agatha Christie had an idea for a long time before she actually sat down and started writing it. And finally, The Moving Finger. Agatha Christie had to reread this novel recently, obviously recently to the time when she was writing the list, and she really enjoyed reading that novel. So if you're looking for an Agatha Christie novel to read and you're not sure which one to take, feel free to use one of her 10 favorite books. And this was all for today. Thank you for staying with me and watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel, and I hope to see you soon. Bye bye.